to the Xanadu Review. My name is Prester John's Revenge, but you can call me PJ. Today on the show I have Monia Ali, who writes for the Fandom Exile Substack. Monia, do you want to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, the type of things you do, and the kind of writing you do?
Yeah, I cover fandom for non-fandom folks mostly. I feel like I try to make it comprehensible as a community and how the industry interacts with it, because I feel like a lot of fandom coverage is very much like looking at it from afar and not acknowledging that there is interaction between industry and these people, and that they're communities. They're not just like individual people. So there's a lot of that, a lot of history of different fandoms. Yeah, just the way that it has devolved over time and how stan culture has kind of taken over in many spaces. And then some movie stuff and random culture things that I'm really into.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting stuff. I guess you kind of came onto my radar because of the fandom writing. And I read a good chunk of your stuff without really thinking about the origin of the fandom exile thing. I didn't really. I thought it was maybe just a cool name or something. Do you maybe want to tell the audience a little bit about that story? Because I found that super, super fascinating. You have a cool article about that too.
Yeah, it's the first thing I published because I had been working on various things, but I was like, I'll just post this first so that it kind of establishes like, why am I writing? I've been a fan for since I was 11, and I've been active in fandom since I guess maybe I was 12, 13. And there's an unspoken rule in fandom that you don't talk about it with outsiders. Like, you're not really supposed to talk about what goes on. But I noticed that wasn't it's not necessarily that fans themselves were breaking that rule, but industry was watching us anyway and reporting on us and, talking about it. So I was like, well, we should have the right to talk back a little bit. And primarily, that's why I was like, okay, I will start writing about this for the public, because I had been dealing with my exile, which is I sort of fell into being a stan for One Direction, which is why I specify that I've been a fan for so long, because that's how I know that there's a difference, basically. I've experienced normal fandom, and then I experienced what standom is like. And I didn't have the chance to sort of fall out of interest with it. I was kicked out essentially of the community. Yeah, I don't know how. It's very hard for me to talk about it without going super granular into all of the little details, and it's so meaningless to other people. But I'll just say that people like to talk about tin hats, or how certain groups of fans are conspiracists. I think everyone who is a stan is a conspiracist, because they have to believe in an idolized version that is being, it requires so much cognitive dissonance that it's you have to believe in the purity of what you're worshiping, right? And that requires shutting out a lot of things that make you sort of a conspiracist.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage anybody listening, if you haven't, go read. And what was the name of the article again? Because you delve into the specifics of it.
Yeah, it's When Fandom Becomes Cultic, the One Direction Experience.
Yeah, because that was the kind of the takeaway for me. Because to me, I would have, from on the outside looking in, I would have assumed the One Direction fandom would have been not as high octane as that, not as intense, if that makes sense. Because it's not exactly the same thing. Because when I was in high school, I was super, super into heavy metal, and it was very it was a weird thing. On one hand, you would see a lot of camaraderie, but also people would get really mad and have big arguments over what, again, kind of like you mentioned, on the outside would seem very, very minor differences. If that makes sense.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Yeah. So, and quick thing, I guess, just for the audience, if anybody, because maybe not everybody is familiar, how would you, first of all, how would you define a stan, and how is that difficult from just being a fan?
Well, I like the description that being a fan is being pro-social and being a stan is anti-social, in the way that fans are not necessarily in fandom, right? Because fandom is the communal aspect of it. But fans have a connection with their fan object, which could be like a sport team or a person or a TV show, like whatever it is your fan object, right? They have a relationship with it that is personal, and that they, can share with other people, but it's still like tied to their own connection with it. Whereas stans need to be validated at every turn because they need to proselytize and what's the term they always use? Evangelize. They're essentially, what I discovered when I was doing my research, a lot of these marketers talked about customer evangelists, which are the 1% of any type of like fan base. And I'm like, oh, that's the stan, because the way that they're describing it is like they have this spiritual connection to the item. They believe that they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and they'll, promote the brand freely because they believe in it. And I was like, oh, so you're talking about stans, like you wanted these.
Free advertising.
Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know, I think the origin of the term is the song "Stan" by Eminem, and if anybody's not heard it, it's like about this obsessive fan of Eminem who, like, I think wants to, like, kidnap him or kill him because he's so obsessed with Eminem. So I think that's a good differentiation between stan and fan. Did you come up with the stan versus stan, like pro-social versus anti-social?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really astute. And it kind of reminds me, I forget where I originally read it, but somebody was saying, like, you don't really see cults anymore in the modern day because, like, the type of people who would join a cult are like Marvel fans now. Do you see any of that? Like, because sometimes, like, because I don't know, because like I'm not super into a lot of fandoms anymore. I used to be, years ago, and I guess I want your input on this too, because I remember. I think I'm probably a little bit older than you. I'm in my early 30s. I don't know if you want to say how old you are, but when I was very young, okay. Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then you saw the whole thing then, right? Because I remember first getting online in like the early 2000s in some of these fan spaces, and there's things like the campaign to like bring back Firefly, for example, right?
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that, and it was basically completely ignored. The only small win they got was they had a movie for it, right? To finish it up, for those who don't know, Firefly was a early 2000s sci-fi show, very heavily beloved, but got canceled before its time. There's this big like internet campaign, and it was maybe one of the first times that at least that I'm aware of, that like the corporate side actually started to take interest and notice the fandom side, because for a long time I would assume that they just kind of ignored the fandom because and then it seems like at a certain point, and I'm not quite sure it was, if I had to guess, like early to mid 2010s or something like that, when they started to notice and then actively feed into it, kind of like you mentioned. And maybe that's around the time where I checked out because it stopped being fun. Like another big one for me for a long time was I was really into Star Wars, and then the Star Wars sequels came out, and it was like 50-50. People either loved it or hated it, and it wasn't enough to just like oh, I liked it, I didn't like it. It was like saying like you killed my dog and my mom, because I liked the movie, you didn't, or vice versa. So I don't know, any thoughts on specifically like how that changed? Because it sounds like you've been in fandom for a long time. Like, would you say there was a specific inflection point, or was it just a long, slow poisoning?
I think it's been a slow change, and I do think I know it's like passe, like it's so old hat to be like social media, but I do think social media has impacted a lot just because of the way that it changed the infrastructure of how people interact online. And then now we got that global village that, McLuhan was talking about. And he was right. Like, we're all tribes and we're all fighting each other. Like, oh, we thought a global village was going to be nice and cozy, but turns out actually we got spears and we're coming after each other.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that you mentioned that about Star Wars, because you just reminded me of when I went to see the first Lord of the Rings, and I saw it in theaters, and it was fine. Like, I wasn't blown away. But if I I told people, and they got so angry at me that I was like, I will never watch any of these movies. Like, you have convinced me now that I will never engage with this. So those might have been like early early stands. There's definitely people that were incredibly devotional, definitely in the 90s. Like, there's Michael, like a lot of stuff that I've been reading is older. So, like, there's Bruce Springsteen fans, there's Michael Jackson fans. Like, the way that they describe their devotion is very intense. And Michael Jackson's fans' devotion has been described as like they feel like they have a moral duty to protect him and to, you know, correct the record and make sure that the narrative is straight. And that's not all Michael Jackson fans, obviously. It's like that specific small percentage of people that, you know, feel that strongly about it. But I think I would say industry started noticing things on LiveJournal for sure. LiveJournal, I think, started like because it was kind of open, and so they could sort of start paying attention. But you're right, they didn't start really fully feeding into it until the 2010s, for sure.
Do you think that was a function of like? Because to me, I wonder if it was like the higher ups. Because I would imagine, like, you know, older generations were not necessarily paying attention. But that's when you started to see like millennials starting to enter the workforce and maybe getting into these marketing departments. And because I feel like many people I knew growing up, you were into like these are all like, you know, online fandom spaces that exist, and like we were kind of primed for it in a way with like, you know, Neopets or some of these other things that everybody kind of just grew up with.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think that's has anything to do with it?
I mean, that's entirely possible. It's possible that they were being sought after, because I know that a lot of people that run update accounts now and stan accounts will get promoted into executive roles. What's his name? The Bieber guy who has a beef with Taylor Swift. I'm like blanking on his name. He had an interview and he was talking about how, like, oh yeah, a lot of the people that we worked with who ran update accounts are now executives, right? So like there's definitely been that type of poaching, I think. And I think what I've definitely noticed with millennials joining in the workforce is this thing called cultural acupuncture, which was kind of this model invented by a Harry Potter fan who was talking about how we need to use the media to be activists, essentially. And part of that was like, yeah, if you start working at a place, like you have to start promoting the values, like the media has to reflect the values that we're trying to portray. And you just need a few of those people, right, to get in and start pumping things out and sort of, you know, those things take off and so on and so on, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's something that can definitely backfire, because when you talk about, like the Lord of the Rings specifically, because I remember like I was never on Tumblr, but like I know the Super Wholock thing, right? Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock. There's certain things that like I have a friend, she's like, you know, I'll just never watch Doctor Who because the fans are so toxic. And there's definitely certain things where like they have like, and again, like to me, I wouldn't have thought One Direction or like what's that show, Steven Universe.
Yeah.
Like I found out like, you know, trying to get like artists to like, you know, bully them into suicide and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Because to me it seems like almost inverse, right? Because you want maybe that's like, again, like you're inviting and inspiring that kind of attitude when you have values as opposed to just like, oh, I like this thing, because you're inviting a certain type of person, which maybe isn't that good for it. Because at least for me, I just ended up checking out because, I mean, say what you will about like, you know, the Star Wars sequels that came out in the Disney era, there was like a small subset of the people who were into it who like made it a culture wars thing, and that just made me completely check out of the fandom.
Yeah,
just
no,
it's not fun anymore.
It can really be ruined, and I think much more easily nowadays because of the online infrastructure and how everything bleeds into each other. Because it's funny, when I asked if a fandom had ever, you know, made people not interested, Firefly did come up a lot, and I was like, that's so interesting, because I was a Firefly fan, but I wasn't engaged in the fan communities. So that completely passed me by. Like I wasn't aware.
Mhm.
I was aware enough that I went to see the movie when it came out. Right. So like
Mhm.
somehow I was tapped in, but I wasn't tapped into whatever was going on with people being crazy. Whereas today, I feel like that would be impossible. Like you would know what those people on Twitter are saying. Oh, Twitter fandom, because that happens as well, right? The Tumblr fans make fun of the Twitter fans. The Twitter fans make fun of the Tumblr fans, and then the Instagram fans, like, oh, who cares about them?
Right.
There's like a personality attached to each platform's fans.
Yeah. I also wonder. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this because I know there's been like, especially in the recent years, like a couple of really big, high-profile failures
Hmm.
in like movies and video games, TV shows, stuff like that. I even saw that what was her face? Charlie XCX had this big tour, and it seriously underperformed. It seems like the maybe that is because at first it might have been good, right? Because you're getting people to engage a lot more with your content, your product. But if you're listening to these really small percentage of fans, you're not really getting a good picture of like what maybe the average person who doesn't pay attention to that kind of thing is into.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's funny that you brought up the Charlie XCX tour because I feel like there is more to that story, but um now we're entering like talking about the music industry and that's how how that is constructed. They very have like there's basically no time when world tours were happening when the Rolling Stones were not touring. The Rolling Stones are still touring. Like that's how new
Mhm.
all of this is, right? Um they rely on these big ticket prices. There were, I want to say it's either Rolling Stone or Billboard. They published like a think piece in 2016, 2017 about how they were panicking because all the boomer musicians are going to stop touring now. So where are we going to get our money? Like, how are we going to charge thousands per ticket when we don't have Elton anymore? And, whatever else is out there that people like really love.
Mhm.
Um, they're aging out and we never cared to actually foster like a new class of musicians. So I think part of it is that they're putting a lot of acts into big rooms and trying to charge a lot. Another thing is that are you familiar with the a thousand true fans
No,
model?
what's that?
Okay, so this came out in the I want to say mid 2000s, but that might be too early. It's a model that was saying that everyone just needs 1,000 true fans, and you can make a living. Like you just need 1,000 people that really believe in you and will like subscribe. Like in this today's model, it would be like you just need 1,000 people to subscribe to you, and you'll do okay. That has now been reduced to 100. Like you just need 100. You just need them to really give you a lot of money. And you need to be selling them this connection that isn't real. Like you're selling something that you can't really, it's not tangible. Like you're not selling a product, you're selling a feeling essentially. So you could have an arena show that is maybe 20% sold, and you might still have actually met your minimum because who knows how much that 20% paid.
Hmm. I guess that makes sense. And as far as you mentioned that there's that old guard that's kind of on the way out, and there because I can't think of. I'm trying to because I guess you have like maybe some of your Gen X era musicians like some big rappers or maybe some bands or pop stars, but it feels like there's definitely been diminishing returns, and to the point now where again to the point of Charlie XCX, it sounds like you're maybe a little bit more clued into that than I am. But I
Mhm.
also sometimes wonder. I think I brought this up to you at least like in text before. Of it sometimes it feels like what quote unquote pop music is not necessarily what's popular because growing up even up until like 10 years ago, and I realize part of it isn't me getting older, but I wasn't actively listening to the radio, and I could tell you a Beyonce song or a Coldplay song just because like it was in movies, it was in public places and stuff. And you don't really see that quite as much anymore. Like there's these bands or artists who are supposedly really big, but like I couldn't tell you any of their songs. So I guess, do you think it's that it's like a different type? Is there a different type of fan as people get younger? Because I remember, I feel like pretty much everybody's seen a documentary of like the Beatles and people losing their shit, and you don't really see that anymore. Is it like we're qualitatively different types of fans in different generations, or is it just that they weren't fostered, like you said?
I think that's interesting that you say you don't really see that anymore, because I think you see it all the time. You just see it for a lot of smaller artists. So basically, like the devotion is still there. And they go, like the Taylor Swift fans like are as devoted as the Beatles fans were. I'm trying to think, like the K-pop fans are all just as like intensely devoted. I think even more probably because of the ways that they are urged to keep spending and, tie themselves to their fan object, like whichever they call it a bias, like whatever their favorite character these are fictional names. Their favorite member of the group is their bias, so they acknowledge that it's like, well, I have a bias for this person, and like their connection to that person is like strong, and they're encouraged to buy things and pay a lot of money to support them, essentially. But I feel like that's a separate point from like not knowing music anymore, like what's in the top 40 and stuff like that. That I think is also a sign of fans possibly gaming the system, but also industry gaming the system. I think whenever people talk about fans gaming the system, they never acknowledge that industry games the system. Like the system is gamed, like it's been gamed from the beginning. Every time the rules change, they find new ways of doing it. I was reading a book about Casablanca Records, which was the big disco record company in the 70s. And this guy was saying like, oh yeah, we would send 100,000 promo albums out, and then you would have it like shipped 100,000. Like, okay, that's 100,000 souls. And then they might return them, but it's like, that doesn't matter. Like we still have the numbers, and how they would be in communication with the people that wrote the charts and were like, you're going to give us that number one, right? Like the way that this was structured was just, constructed. And that's also why I think the disco crash, like, was mostly a crash of the illusion. I don't think it was necessarily that people just like stopped liking it. I think it was like more the illusion kind of collapsed. The same happened with hair metal, where Nielsen, I think it's Nielsen SoundScan, was introduced in the early 90s, which meant that they now knew actually how many albums were being sold. And some of the hair metal guys have said, like, we think that's why, like, we kind of collapsed, because suddenly it was like, oh, they're not selling as much as we were told that they were. Like, we were told that these were like super high selling bands, but turns out that once we're actually counting the albums, it's not really doing anything. Or like they're selling, but like probably not, the amounts at the speed as everyone else was doing. I also think that earlier on, songs had longer to mature. So you might have heard a song because it's been out for a year, and it's like it's slowly been climbing the charts. Whereas nowadays it seems like if it's not a hit in 1 month, then it's like pull it from radio, cancel everything, like regroup, angle something. Like there's no breathing room seemingly for anything to grow. They just want that chart number, and then they can just pull the support because now they have that number one, and now they don't have to do the radio support anymore.
It kind of makes it feel like it's a house of cards thing, because I read a lot about kind of like the area you talked about, like 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's because it's just a very fascinating time in music history, the way that the business worked. Because also, like, either with hair metal or disco, it sounds like there's a collapse in sales, possibly due to what you mentioned, possibly oversaturation. But also think like it was a case of like the cultural gatekeepers, like, nope, we need a new thing now. Whereas now, again, if I could see like any major theme, it's, that happens every, couple of weeks or months or whatever it is, as opposed to, okay, it's been a decade of disco, let's do hair metal now. It's been a decade of hair metal, let's do grunge, It seems like, and again, like I guess now that you mention it, you're right. You do see a lot of those like hyper, evangelical fans, but
Mhm.
it's so, these smaller groups, which I guess like it would make it really hard to have that world tour like you mentioned because it's such a microcosm. And it makes me wonder, like, have you heard of, some of these, older legacy, mostly boomer acts who do like a hologram version of themselves, like
Yeah, well, Kiss
just do
has a
kind of,
hologram.
yeah, or Michael
Yeah, and they're
Jackson.
yeah, and they're alive. So it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
ABBA has their holograms. I find that incredibly shameful. And they pulled them out when Sweden had Eurovision this year. They had ABBA perform. I'm doing like air quotes, and it was like the hologram versions of them, like from the 70s, like the young thems. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, this is shameful. There's not just that. There's also now they're using AI to produce new songs. Like one of the BTS guys has a collab with Bing Crosby coming out. And I believe one of the Grateful Dead guys also has some sort of like who passed away, like also has his voice on something.
yeah.
And I think
Well,
the boomer acts doing this are going to make things worse for like the people that are coming up.
well, I mean, I would say that like you're making it really hard for new acts to, like you said, come up, but also like the the boomers who are going to see those shows are going to die out too. It was like there's like like somebody who's like 19, 20 give a shit about Kiss. I mean, there's some people who do, but like it feels like across, at least to me, across the board, and you probably have a better insight to this than I do. It feels like the entertainment industry is headed for like a giant collapse because again, like I kind of alluded to this. I know in the last year or two there have been several really, really big budget things that failed and lost a shit ton of money.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're talking about with the music industry, huge like video game tentpole things that I was talking with another good Substacker, Yakubian Ape, and he was talking about this video game Concord that they spent like hundreds of $1,000,000, and I think at the height of their player base, they had like a couple hundred people playing it. So I don't know. What do you think? Like, what do you see the future of entertainment and as a result fandom being? Is it going to be just like a million smaller, kind of, you mentioned the global village, just like your little tribes of fandoms, or do you think that there ever could be a mass culture again, like we saw with the baby boomer era with the Beatles? Because I know you mentioned like Taylor Swift is really big, and you have micro fandoms of smaller bands, what have you. But it feels like the Beatles was like football, right? Like everybody back then at least knew it. So I don't know. What do you think? What's the future?
Well, so it's interesting. So I know I mentioned the Beatles, but it is interesting though that the Beatles are always used as this reference point because there were other artists that had like just as intense fandoms, but they just don't get talked about. I think probably because Paul McCartney's still around and like a lot of them lived for a while and were still active, and there was an interest in maintaining that. But Frank Sinatra had fans that were called Bobby Soxers, and they were treated like the way you would treat emo kids when they were around. They're like, oh my God, these girls have lost their minds. Like, how are we ever going to get them to like see reason again? The Bay City Rollers, which were I think they were kind of the Beatles era, but no one remembers them now, even though that was like so massive. So I think there can be massive things, but will you hear about it? Like, how massive does it have to be to count as massive? First of all, it feels like it only feels massive if you encounter it. Like if one encounters it and you're not really familiar with it, and you're like, wow, this is so much bigger than I thought. Like, looks like it's massive. So there's definitely that, like, that's out there. It just might not be reported on, really.
Yeah.
You might not hear about it.
I wonder if it has to do with, at least, because my understanding of, so the 60s, almost up until like the 90s, for the most part, you had much more of a monoculture, since there were more gatekeepers. There was only so many television channels, only so many radio channels. I couldn't tell you the exact number, but I read something like it was like a day or a week in 2024, more music was released than the entire year of 1987. There's just quantitatively so much more. We're so much more connected than, you know, we were in previous eras. So it almost makes me think like we could never have that monoculture moment again, because we don't have a monoculture, and I don't ever really see that being able to be something that's recaptured.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I find it hard to picture myself. And I think, like, as for like the future of fandom, what I think is a lot of these professions are going to be just decoy professions. Wow, I don't know why I couldn't say that. Decoy professions. Whereas it's the human brand that has the fandom, and then what they're doing, like if they do music, that's like one of the ways, like one of the streams that fans can support them through, but they're primarily attached to the person, like the brand that they're representing, which is how people will stand out from, like, you know, that flood of music. Like, you need to have a person that they can have a narrative around, that then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, like that's why, I mean, part of me feels like that's partially why Taylor Swift is so massive, is because she's managed to have so many narratives constantly going. Like, she's always the main character in the movie of her life, and people are watching and they're like getting attached to the storylines and the supporting characters, and like, oh no, now this is a villain. Like, now, oh no, we're back to, like, it's a grand story that you can follow. And because it's all online as well, you can go into whatever storyline you want to know more about and sort of dive in. Like the Beatles have a resurgence on TikTok now, for example, like young Beatles.
That's really interesting. And I guess that makes me wonder too, because I guess I would say, first of all, it seems like that can be a really double-edged sword. Yes. And if you're somebody who, I don't know if you're a big Swiftie, and that, you know, I've already slightly criticized Taylor Swift before, and I want to get Swifties mad at me. But I wonder if part of the reason Taylor Swift is so massive is because she's so inoffensive as a person and musically. Like, I enjoy her music, but it's not, she seems very, you know, unproblematic in pretty much every way that you could be. And when you talk about these, you know, wanting to have the person first and selling that story, because I mean, really, I wonder, maybe part of the reason you talk about the Beatles and not the Bay City Rollers. I think the Beatles, like, probably objectively sold more records, but there's
the Bay City Rollers story is insane. Like,
okay, put a pin in that for now.
Yeah.
But point being, like, there is just endless documentaries about the Beatles, and it's all about people's experience with them and like knowing about them as a person. And I guess this makes me wonder, this is just something that occurred to me. I want to know your thoughts. Are you aware of like in Japan, they have like these virtual idols, like what are named Hatsune Miku or something like that?
Yes.
I almost wonder if that is going to be the future, because after all, you know, maybe after the boomer musicians are gone, I think maybe Gen X has a little bit of gas in them, but there's quantitatively less big Gen X stars. Is it just going to be complete manufactured pop stars, and it's going to be like wrestling, or like, you know, yeah, I know it's fake, I don't care, I like the music, and I want to see, you know, maybe we'll see a convergence again, because back then, like, you had the Beatles movies, and you're starting to see that again, where like, yeah, it's all basically fictional. Like, Taylor Swift might as well be a fictional character for the way that most people interact with her, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be a market for the Vocaloids. I think where they're stumbling now is how to make it an experience, like a real life experience, because they took her, you know, the technology, they took the technology on tour, and they had a performance at, I want to say at Coachella. Yeah, probably Coachella. And they didn't have like the hologram, like they had a screen, like they just had a screen, and everyone was like, what are you doing? Like, I thought the whole point of this was that it's like, oh my God, like it's a holographic, like this, and it's like, oh no, we just have like a big LED screen for you to look at. So somehow they're kind of stumbling on the finish line for that. But there's definitely going to be a market for it. I don't know if it's going to take over. What I think is probably going to grow is people that are already in the public eye having digital avatars of themselves. Like, this is already a thing in Asia. K-pop stars have, there's apps where they have like digital versions of themselves that are like a virtual boyfriend to the fans. And it's like there's little avatars, like they're sending messages to each other. Like it's fully a fictionalized digital experience that I think will continue to grow. And then like, I guess like it just depends on like, are you going to sign up? And like, well, if you have kids, maybe you're like, well, I do want them to keep making money. Like when I pass on, like I want to secure the future. Like that might be a reason why someone like signs on to do it. Or, you know, they just like the idea that they don't have to be everywhere all at once and they can just have their avatar, you know, in 100 places getting money from 100, like, you know, there's more revenue streams if you can be in infinite places, right?
Do you see buy-in there? Because at least to me, like, I'm more of, I guess, you know, more of a rock guy, you know, rock and metal. And you mentioned Kiss. I know I saw that. I was never like the biggest Kiss fan. Although I did kind of get into their fandom, which is maybe we could talk about it. It's kind of funny, but I didn't. I'm not really super into their music, but they have super passionate fans.
Yes,
which to me is very funny. You see like these like, you know, men in their 50s and 60s who are like just getting into such big fights with each other over drama from the 70s, over like guys in their 70s and 80s, which is why I got into the fandom. It was very funny. But I guess that's just as an aside, because I saw the Kiss holograms, and it's not even them as, you know, them in their prime. It's them as like superheroes, basically. It's more real than real. It's like, you know, Gene Simmons, you know, with the body of a bodybuilder, and, you know, they're 7-8 feet tall. So I guess that's kind of what I was getting at, that when you talk about like these K-pop people, when they have multiple virtual versions of themselves, do you think fans or even like the stan side will buy into that? Because part of me thinks that like people, it's like, that's inauthentic, but I also feel like the groundwork has kind of been laid with, you know, basically 2 decades now of the internet being mainstream, and especially, you know, post-COVID, where virtualization became a commonplace. Do you think that could take off more and kind of be an art form in and of itself? Again, that's kind of why I said then, like, do you even need the original thing in the first place? Do you even need a Taylor Swift? Can you not just create, you know, like, you know, what's her phrase, Miku? Could you not just have somebody whole cloth? Like, I wonder if like in future generations we'll see that more, because I know like the boomer generation, like the idea of somebody lip syncing or using tracks, you know, backtracks, is like anathema. They can't, like, you know, it makes people so mad. But, you know, younger generations don't really seem to care. So is it just, you know, people getting disconnected from reality? Or you're smiling, am I way off? Like,
no, it's just funny. I think you're right that in general, the populace does not care if someone is singing to a backing track. But there is a YouTuber called Wings of Pegasus, and he does like song analysis and live performance analysis. And he will get railed when he mentions like a specific person that has like a lot of fans. He's like, oh, well, and he's never doing it in like, oh, this scam is using a backing track. It's more like, this is how you can tell based on the sound vocals. And he will get like fully brigaded and like attacked over it. So there's still like a subsection of people that, this is what I mean when I say, when you're a stan, you're a conspiracist. Like, these people do not believe that their, you know, little meow meow, their idol, like, you know, their person would never do that. Why are you, you know, doing this to them? Or if they're doing it, why are you highlighting it? Why are you giving this more attention? Like, it shouldn't have any attention. Like, you shouldn't be talking about this. Like, we should all be pretending like this isn't happening. They get very upset if they're told that's going on. But yeah, the general public doesn't seem to care. Like, Glastonbury, I think, is majority backing track. At the risk of, I mean, I'm not scared of angering the Swifties. I've survived, you know, One Direction. That's fine. I don't know if she sings live, because I've seen her and I'm like, oh, there's no band. Like, what? Okay, so where's the music coming from? Like, okay.
It doesn't have to be all one or the other, too. I remember even reading an interview with Beyonce. She was like, I do like 70-80% live, and I'll lip sync. Like, there's certain songs, like, this is just such a difficult song. If I were to actually sing it live, I could. My voice would be done, and then that'd be it. And like, kind of similar to me, like, I don't know, 'cause it sounds like, maybe older generations or certain forms of music, like, punk rock or metal or
Hmm.
something like that, it's about being the antithesis to pop. But like, if I were to go see, say, like Kiss or Motley Crue, just because, I'm not a huge fan, but if it was at a festival, yeah, sure, I know that. I would rather hear a backing track and have them lip sync to that, a guy in his 60s try to sing like he's 22,
Yeah.
because to me at that point, like, I'm at the circus. I know that, I know this is not real. I'm here for the experience. I don't really care.
Yeah.
I don't know, it seems like, different fandoms, or like, it's almost, and again, it makes me think of wrestling, because like pretty much, I
Hmm.
think at this point, they've acknowledged, yeah, it's fake. But I remember growing up, people would get so mad if you would say it's fake.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, yeah, I'm just here to have fun. I know it's like, it's half like stage drama, really.
Yeah.
I've kind of joked around with another friend on here. We've called it wrestling is like drag. It's like a drag show for straight people, really, because it's
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
over the top and dramatic. But like, I feel like intellectually, if you're not a huge Swiftie, what have you, um, it's like, yeah, she's probably going to lip sync sometimes. That's fine. But if you still really want to buy in, like, you take that as a personal attack.
Yeah. Because her show is, it's not a concert. Like it's a show. Like it's a show. So it's like, okay, so you can't sing all the time. Like that's fine, I guess. I have a friend who is a massive Swiftie and she hates concerts, but she loves Taylor Swift shows because it's not a concert. Like it's
Mhm.
not structured in the same way, really. Um, like I went to the Reputation tour for my friend's birthday, and there was like massive snakes coming out of the ground, and she was like traveling between the snakes, and then she was standing there, and then she was in the middle of the floor, and touching the fans. Like it's a production, right? It's not really, yeah, it's not really what I would classify as a classic concert. But maybe concerts are passe now. Like that's
Yeah.
possible.
Well, and it also kind of makes me think of like a band like the Gorillas or like
Mm-hmm.
Metalocalypse, if you know them. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, what's
Mm-hmm.
the name of the band? Death Clock. Like, you know that it's fake. You know that you're just there for the show. But again, I also wonder, like, will we hit a point of diminishing returns at this? Because I saw there's a YouTuber by the name of, I think, Blink, and he made a video, and I think we had another creator we both mutually admire, Katham D, has kind of said the same thing, where like all the interesting stuff is happening in real life,
Yeah.
as opposed to these online fandoms. And will this just hit like a critical mass point where like people, you don't want this, and we're going to see maybe another explosion in live bands, or is it just, again, like, um, kind of like we said, the monoculture just doesn't exist anymore, and we can kind of see both exist simultaneously.
Yeah. I mean, I hope live bands come back strong. The only problem there is the infrastructure is not great. Like the people who own the clubs like are losing a lot of money. Like there's a lot of difficulty with that. And then in the US, I mean, like you've got Live Nation Ticketmaster to deal with, who are, they're the monoculture. Like, they're
Mhm.
the ones that decide who get to play these venues, essentially. Um, and they have such a stranglehold that, like, I wonder if the US will decrease in prominence, maybe, for like musicians like touring and stuff like that. Um, because in Canada there's multiple ticketing providers. Like Ticketmaster and Live Nation are still like disasters here, but at least we have like a few other alternatives. So not every show is via Ticketmaster. Not every venue has to use Ticketmaster. Europe is the same. That's why a lot of Americans flew to Europe to go see Taylor Swift, because they weren't dealing with the same fees necessarily.
So
And
it's
also, I
actually
guess,
cheaper to fly to Europe to see Taylor Swift in some cases, or whoever.
I mean, according to them, it was. I haven't seen their actual individual ticket prices, but I'll say when I saw her, I paid $70. Like, um,
What it should be worth, basically. Yeah, even bands that like, because one of my favorite bands is the Smashing Pumpkins, and they came to my
yes,
city. It's like, oh yeah, I'd love to see them. Like, for a semi decent, not even like front row, semi decent was like
yeah,
$300. Like, this is insane. it feels like, they're kind of killing their golden goose. Because I know, at least on one hand, like Canada has, I believe you have laws where like you have to play a certain percentage of Canadian musicians.
Yes.
But again,
yeah.
like, yeah, I'd be interested to know, because between that over here in the U.S., which, for better or the worse, has been the tastemaker for, last 60, 70 years, whatever it is. Are we, I guess, maybe we will see the decline of U.S. as, the kingmakers of pop culture. Because I guess you could say Taylor Swift is really big, but I'm trying to think of like the last really big artist who is ubiquitous and huge overseas. It feels like we're seeing not like, we're having a huge drop off, but it's noticeable, at least to me. Like maybe Beyonce, is that another semi-recent?
Yeah, I would say Beyonce is really big. I don't follow her closely enough to know like if she tours in Asia, because Asia often gets snubbed when they do worldwide tours, and Africa gets snubbed a lot. She must do South America. South America is really, really big for tours. Acts
That's one of the few places bands can make money, is what I hear. Specific, like that's weirdly enough, like the biggest market for like rock and metal is in South America. It's like huge there.
Yeah, they have these massive venues. Like at the risk of sounding embarrassing, like my bias One Direction guy was touring in South America, and he had a show for just him with 60,000 people, and you wouldn't know his name. Like, do you know what I mean? Like people wouldn't know.
Who's not Harry Styles? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the one I know. Yeah. No, it's very interesting to see how that's going for sure. Lost my train of thought there. So I guess one of the other things that kind of made me think about, because we touched on this a little bit, it almost seems like for some people, fandom has taken the place that religion did in their lives. Just not necessarily, I don't even mean that in a judgmental way, but just like that is the way that like, maybe our parents or grandparents would have centered everything around religion in church or, Jesus or a saint. People will completely center that fandom around, center their lives around a fandom in that same way.
Yeah.
Do you
I mean, I agree with that. I'm sort of like, this question is one that is very hard to answer because what do people define as religion? A lot of people who don't like that comparison either are religious or have grown up religious, and they get very offended because they're like, well, there's no afterlife. Like, what are you talking about? Like, who are the deities? Like, what is your promise? Like, what is the holy text? And I'm like, okay, I get that. I think I grew up entirely secular, so I can't relate to that. To me, I just see the system, like the cultural system of like,
that's kind of what I meant for reference. That's more or less it, like a framing device for your life, really.
Yeah, like just a way of creating meaning through repeated like exposure, like going to concerts. Not for everyone. This is the thing. Not everyone actually likes going to concerts, but if you really like it, if you really like the band, like it can be like an awe-inspired, like an awesome experience in the original sense of the word, right? Where like you really have a high, like you get that euphoric high, and then you have the post-concert depression, like, right?
I have heard people describe it as a religious experience, or I've heard many articles where somebody will say, a movie theater is like almost like a church for them, and film is like a religious experience.
Yeah. And I think religious people get offended, but it's like, it's very personal, and it is about a feeling that if you don't feel it, then you don't feel it, right? Like if I go into a church, I'm not going to feel anything that someone who is religious will feel. And that's just like, and it's the same thing, right? Like you don't, like not everyone is going to be affected the same way. It's also like, how can you figure out who someone is going to like? Like you can present like a row of 5 artists that are kind of the same, but one of them will resonate with someone and another one will resonate with someone else. Like how does that work? Like how do we know what exactly it is that draws you to that one specific person? Like that's kind of mysterious as well. And you're right, because there is a lot of, I think, generational fandom that is used kind of the way that people would go to church or whatever. Because I don't know that people who would go to church regularly were necessarily all like, super believers, or whether they just did it as a cultural traditional thing. Like you have the sports fans pass down the sports fandom, and they go to the matches, they go to the games, they do the tailgating, like all of that is like a big structure. And even the Star Wars fans, I feel like, have done that, and Star Trek fans like passing it on to their kids.
My dad for sure did. I remember when I was I think that's probably why for so long, I mean, I still really like it. I have like I have probably 50 or so of the old pre-Disney books and stuff like that, because when I was a very little kid, to his credit, George Lucas released the prequel trilogy when I was, a relatively young kid. I think it was like 10 or 11 or something like that. And it was probably around the same time my dad saw the originals, and he got he showed me the old VHSs of the original ones. It took me. So yeah, I think, I know in George Lucas's case, that was a very cynical thing that he did consciously. But with all of this, it feels like the community aspect is part of what I mean when I say the religious thing, because you have the shared thing you all have. Because I grew up very religious. My dad was a pastor, actually. I'm not religious now, but I do see that that parallel a lot of the times. Because sometimes it's semi-ironic with like, with the character Obi-Wan Kenobi. He has that kind of long hair and a beard, like, blessed be Obi-Wan Kenobi. There's even I think in the UK there's a Jedi religion where some of this stuff is like,
that's funny.
And I hear this with stan and fandom culture. It seems semi-ironic, but you're using religious imagery and language, and I think maybe because people are just looking for some kind of community, because there's definitely still some people who are religious, but it doesn't exist in the same context that it used to.
Yeah, I think the community aspect is definitely like what you would have in a small town, like a church community. Like that's your community. I think the difference is just that fandom is a lot more, there's less connecting you, really, partially because a lot of it is online, that you can disconnect. Like you have an idea of how invested you are in the community and what the community means to you and what you mean to them. And then turns out like, oh no, actually, like they decided something else and now I'm not welcome here anymore. Like it's a very tenuous connection. I mean, it feels very real. And when it's active, it's like, it's amazing, but you have to always be aware that like, this is not permanent. And I guess it's the same case with churches as well. Like people can move, or, they can lose the faith or convert to something else. Like there's a lot of things, but I feel like that was less common, perhaps.
Well, when I grew up, because I grew up very heavily in the church, and kind of in some ways like the religious, like actually reading the Bible aspect was maybe the smallest part about it in some ways. And there's up and downs to it. Like you did have a community, people you saw regularly, and it was more like, okay, we're all here for this reason, but as like the impetus, right, to get there. But once you're there, it's all about now, oh, how are you? How's the family? How's the kid? You're involved with each other's life. And it kind of makes me think of like I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, and it started out as just like, oh, me and my wife had just moved to the city where we live. I just posted on Reddit like, hey, you want to come play D&D? I'm gonna meet some people. Or I had a coworker. It's like, hey, she'd kind of heard of it and see if she wants to come all play. Just, let's play this game. But at this point, like these people are my best friend. That that girl that I worked with, she's now my best friend. I see these people every day, and the D&D, like, we bought the books, almost 10 years ago at this point. It's almost incidental. We're just hanging out with friends.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's the good side of fandom, but you can also have that bad side that comes with religion. Of like, you could be an apostate, as you obviously know.
Yeah, exactly. And it is interesting because live journal fandom to me was very much that thing of like, oh, we met over Queer as Folk, and then you went to Supernatural, and this person went to Fandom, or I went to Fandom, and then I pulled people along with me, but we were still in each other's circles, right? And we're following along. and a few people like I would hang out with in real life. Like I knew someone in New York that I would see like almost every year. And we didn't have any fandoms in common anymore, really. Like she wasn't really engaged in fandom, but we had this friendship that was like surpassed that. It feels less possible these days, but I wonder if that's just because of the hyper public nature of the internet and like the performative aspect of it all, and like how everyone has to fall in line.
Well, I think the culture wars thing has, to me, that's like a big part of why I left, like at least because there's still like, again, the example I use is Star Wars. I loved it when I was a kid. I'd read the expanded universe books, which, as a funny aside, like, even you think that the Star Wars fandom has always been toxic. People were fighting like back in like the 90s and 2000s when I was a kid reading this stuff. But again, sometime around the mid 2010s, that's also when the culture war stuff really started to kick into gear, and the media that you consumed became shorthand in some ways for a political or cultural affectation or worldview that you may or may not even share. Because I remember, like, years ago when I still used Reddit, when The Last Jedi came out, I was, we're talking about it online. It's like, I didn't really like it. It wasn't for me. And this person went off on me, like, you're a Nazi, you're a misogynist. I just said I didn't like a movie. Do you see any way back? All that to say, do you see any way back from that? Because it feels like people have, there's still like, kind of like, and there you would see, and after World War II was over, these Japanese soldiers who were fighting up until the 70s. You're still like, all that to say, there's still some real diehard culture warriors when it comes to fandom, but it feels like people are kind of tuckering themselves out. Or am I completely off base? You're probably more clued into that than I am.
I think there's still a lot of active fighting, but the thing is, the people that are engaging with it healthily, you're probably not seeing. Like you're seeing a very small percentage of people, like you're saying, like you're seeing the people that are still hardcore and are still fighting and are still super involved.
I'm just asking because I don't even engage with it anymore.
I just mean you as in like.
Sure. Oh, okay, yeah. I checked out like 2017. I was like, no, that's enough for me.
Yeah, no, one who might, peruse
the royal you.
Because it's interesting. I'm not on Reddit much. Like I have a Reddit account. I randomly went on this podcast that I like, Speed, and then they were like, oh, local meetup. And I was like, wow, look at this like serendipity that I just randomly went on it today when I maybe check in like once a month. And so we all did the meetup, and we've been seeing each other, this group, this polycule, for like almost a year now. And none of us are Reddit users. Like all of us kind of just check in every now and then, but we somehow found each other through Reddit, and now we have like an offline relationship. So I think what might happen in the future is that the online stuff might help facilitate things, and then you just have to avoid the really crazy people. I don't know. It's hard because I had a big dive into anti-Scientology activism, and the way that devolved was very fanish and cultish and like culture warish as well. So I wonder if maybe these wars will take place more on Discords that aren't, necessarily public, until someone makes a YouTube video about it and
small
has all the screenshots.
instead of big battles, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah. Like as Discord grows, I think and that might actually be positive, like, because that's more gatekeeping. I think the problem is just that our common spaces will continue to be littered and be covered in garbage, and it's going to be hard to pick through that and figure it out.
That's something I was thinking about recently today, because Substack as a platform, I don't know, maybe again, this is maybe just because I'm more in the politics side of it right now. For now, I might have a planned exit from the politics side, but it seems like it's maybe a little bit more right-leaning. But I remember hearing, like, after Trump won, everybody is trying to go over to Blue Sky, for example, I guess is like a Twitter alternative. And I've never used Twitter, but I'm gathering it's kind of more right-leaning now. But all that to say, like, it feels like there's a certain self-selection that's starting to go on.
Yes.
Where maybe you'll have like Facebook or maybe Twitter will normalize. Like you have the mass market stuff where like it'll be more apolitical and pretty much anybody can show up and be a normie. Because it makes me think of kind of to expand on that a little bit. In the last couple of years, there have been huge tentpole movies, say like Top Gun, which is not apolitical because it's about the armed forces, but people maybe just want some generic big tent stuff again. And like if you want to self-select into your own little corner, you can do that. But you see that a little bit with Substack, even seems to have its own balkanization. But it kind of makes me think of an internet before social media, where it was already kind of balkanized. Excuse me. You'd have either a fandom site or something for a specific interest, or even because I don't know, it sounds like maybe we're close to the same age then. I don't know if you ever did like the old school internet forums and message boards.
Yeah,
they all
forums.
kind of they all.
I was running fan sites. I was running fan sites. Yeah.
Well, even like they all kind of had their own culture and vibe and sense of humor, and maybe we'll return to that. It'll be like hyper specific, or no offense to Taylor Swift, but like the most generic big tent pole thing that you could do.
Yeah.
If that makes
No,
sense.
I would like that. I would really like that. I think the only problem I see for that is where is it hosted? Who's running it? What is going to stop them from trying to maximize profit? Like a lot of those things, right? Because like Substack's devolution to me is tied to them having to maximize, engagement and maximize profit and like all of that. When I was running fan sites, I was gifted, server space from someone who paid for a domain, and they would find fan sites that were like on GeoCities or Angelfire that they really liked. And they were like, hey, do you want a subdomain on my server so you don't have to deal with all these ads or whatever? So it was like a benevolent thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I got older, I got my own money, and then I got my own server and I was hosting people. Like it was a lot of that benevolent thing. And I feel like fan sites that had forums were also kind of like that. But I don't know like what's in it for the person that's running them. Do you know what I mean? Like ideally for me, it should be just like a social thing, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's for hobbyists, which to me, because it's funny you say that. I was thinking about in this coming year, I wanted to, because in my day gig is I work in the tech world. So I was like, I could probably repurpose, shall we say, like some old server equipment from work that they're going to throw out, because I would love to like create and locally host like an old school message board and have it be invite only, and like because I do miss that a lot. Because I think especially if you always because I feel like for Gen Z or younger, or even some of the younger millennials, you maybe only know MySpace, Facebook, Twitter on out. But if you first were just getting online in those early days, I really do miss, you could have like weird friends and communities and stuff like that. And when there was more of a barrier to entry, you'd have to like have a little bit of technical skills at the a very bare minimum. Even like, it was like, back in like 2005, like, using like 4chan, you'd have to use a little bit of technical skills, stuff like that. I don't know, because that's kind of what I would like to see, like a smaller, very specific communities. And I think you see a little bit of that with Discord, or I've been invited to a couple like Discord or Telegram groups since I joined Substack. And I guess at that point, like you have to do it for the love of it yourself, I don't know if I would ever start one myself. Maybe I would, just based around interest. It's like, if you have these certain interests or these certain sensibilities, come here, be cool. If you're not cool with, whatever we as a community decide our rules and vibes are, then you're out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like there's going to have to be this type of resistance, counter programming, if you will. And I guess it's just like, what do you do with like the mess that's out there? Like, do you just ignore it? Do you just not engage? I don't know, but I do think that's possible. Like it's entirely possible because there's a lot of people that believe in it. Like in the fandom corner, it's interesting because fandom has historically been a gift economy. Everything is free. Everything is done for the love of it. And then, for the interaction with other people. But since fanfiction.net and Wattpad and God, there's another Movella, I think, another site where they actually actively farm the fan fiction to like go to become a book and then go to a screen. Like they'll pick them up and be like, well, look at this. It has X amount of hits. Like, let's go make it a book. Whereas in the past, it's like, no, you don't do that. Like you don't sell your fan fiction as a book. Like, what are you doing?
Like, sorry, within the community, that was like a taboo because
yeah.
I knew a lot of people who, it seems to be like mostly a phenomenon that women do that I've seen anecdotal. Like pretty much every girl that I was friends with in high school wrote fan fiction, which maybe speaks to like, me and the type of people that I hang out with. But was it like the fandom community was like, no, you don't, never outside the family, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, there was a project called FanLib that was backed by industry that they tried to create in like 2006. And as soon as fans found out that was like a for-profit thing, like it got shut down because fans protested so much. But now the new era of fans are so used to like, well, why can't you make money on Instagram? Like, why can't I just make money being myself? They don't understand why they can't get paid. I mean, legally speaking, it's because you're basing it off of, someone else's IP. Like you can't make money. You
can change it ever so slightly because it feels like there's what was that? 50 Shades of Grey started out as a Twilight fan fiction, if I recall correctly. So there's a model for it. And I think I remember I've read that like a number of authors like it's almost kind of like, to use the musical metaphors. Like you start out, you're playing covers of the stuff that you like, and then it's like, oh wow, that guitar part I fucked it up when I was trying to play it, but it's its own thing now. Or you change it just enough to make it your own thing. So it seems like that's a path now for some writers.
Yeah, for some writers, definitely. I do think, I think it's E.L. James, I think, who wrote 50 Shades. Like, that's what she was planning on doing, apparently, from the beginning. There was, like, a big fandom blow up with her and other people and all that. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter how bad your intentions were. Like, you got your millions, so, like, I guess it worked. And Cassandra Clare, was plagiarizing. And she's still a millionaire. Like, a lot of times this bad behavior gets rewarded ultimately. But yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the changing things is called filing off the serial numbers, essentially. And usually those are AAUs. Like it would be harder for a Twilight fanfiction to become a book if it was set in the world. And it was like, well, what if, I'm not even familiar enough with Twilight to think of like like Edward, an alternate Bella, scenario.
And the others, I don't know. I saw the first one.
Yeah.
When I was in high school.
Whereas 50 Shades was like using those characters and putting them in an entirely new situation. So like once you changed the names, and who knows how true to character those characters even were. Like it will be unrecognizable, right, from the original.
Yeah. Well, do you think, what I was going to say is, do you think that maybe the stan culture, you said, it's a reporting bad behavior, but kind of encourages it? Because at least to me, I think like, for example, I, not as much these days, but I was really into heavy metal. Like to a certain degree, I was like, this may be kind of derivative, but it has the chugga chugga guitar riffs that I like, whatever, or like fantasy. Like, it kind of can be a little bit, formulaic, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It's like, I'm just trying to like read a couple chapters of a book before bed. If there's dragons and a guy with a sword and a lady who can do magic, I'm happy, And if you have the fandom culture, they're like, okay, I like these characters. You might as well just, let me put them in a BDSM billionaire thing, whatever 50 Shades was,
Yeah.
Because it feels like it's kind of like the Lady Death protests too much a little bit. Because like people, it seems like people get really mad, but also like at the end of the day, you still buy it, you still like it, you still consume it. If that makes sense.
You mean like people who buy those books are
Well, just in
protesting?
general, I feel like that's what I'm assuming, I guess, based on what you're saying. Maybe I'm wrong, but if that environment that exists, like, you like,
No.
if you're so obsessed with, say, Harry Potter, and you are an evangelist for it, then if somebody basically just rips off Harry Potter and it's successful enough, like you said, with E.L. James, whoever,
Yeah.
I feel like maybe the culture encouraged that, if that makes sense.
That's a good question. It's possible. It's possible. There are some Harry Potter fan fictions that are being reworked right now into books that blew up on Book Talk, and then people like this is the thing. I think a lot of people that are like, "Oh, I'll buy it," is because they've recognized now that there is a market for people to take advantage of people's desire to have copies of things. By which I mean, this was apparently a big thing during the pandemic that Etsy, people were selling fan fiction on Etsy, but it wasn't their fan fiction. Like they were
Yeah.
just finding, oh, this one has a lot of hits. Like people will want this. So I'll sell this Dramione fan fiction. And then they would find all of these, like the writers would be like, oh my God, what is happening? And it's not even so much like, oh, well, I wanted to make money off of it, but it's like, wow, like I've been, I don't know if scammed is the right word for that, but it's, it's effed up essentially.
Betray, yeah.
So I think some people might be like, well, at least once it's gone through the like publisher and everything, it's fine. And 50 Shades was actually originally published by a fanfiction archive. So it wasn't part of the big publishing, if that's a term that people use, like big publishing. Like it was literally like a fanfiction archive that was like, well, we could sell copies of this for people that want a copy. And was it Penguin? See, now I'm like giving away how little I know about 50 Shades. Random House, like whatever publisher it is that picked it up, like I guess noticed that like, oh, well, there's this publisher that's not a publisher that's like selling all these books. Like imagine if we put some money behind it and marketing and like it'll blow up, and it did. But I think there's also the thing of like, those are the people you see, because there is Archive of Our Own is like my favorite thing that Fandom has created. And it's a nonprofit fanfiction archive. And it is nonprofit. Like it's fully nonprofit. There is, if anyone puts in like, here's my tip jar if you want, like you're out. You get removed because for legal reasons, first of all, like you can't do that. They do also host original fiction. So you can post your original fiction there and sort of gain an audience. That has happened. Captive Prince, I believe, was original fiction that later on, got picked up and published. And like Close Protection, like there's a bunch of those books. But the thing is, they're an archive. So they have everything. And today's fans, the culture war thing, right? They're like, you need to get rid of the underage stuff or else like you need to collapse. Like, oh, you're always asking for money. It's like, yeah, because they're running servers and get, 2.5 billion hits. like the amount of traffic that they have is insane. So they do need to fundraise for costs. But a lot of the new fans are very like anti AO3 because they're like, oh, it has all of these horrible things. And it's like, yeah, because it's an archive, like, and you can filter that out. Like you never have to see it. You could say like, I don't want this. You never have to see it. But the fact that it's there at all makes them very angry. And it's just very strange to see fandom turn on like the only nonprofit, like the only nonprofit fandom thing. Like it's not Tumblr, where Tumblr makes money from us posting on Tumblr essentially because of engagement or whatever. And it's not fanfiction.net where they run ads or, Wattpad. Like it's fully just like entirely free, entirely fan run. Yeah. And a lot of fans, probably the ones that are buying those books, are like, we hate this. Like it needs to collapse.
Yeah.
We want it gone.
Well, it makes me, again, it feels almost like the religious aspect of like, you want the purity of it, and you want it to be pure in the way that you think of it as pure, not in the way that another person could, that sounds like, be it sexual content or whatever. But you mentioned Book Talk, and is that something you're super clued into? Because I've never had TikTok, but I have one of my best friends, Chesterton's Fence, who writes on here, is a published author, and he has to like be aware of book talks. I've heard him talk about it, and there's this woman on not TikTok, on YouTube, who does a lot of like I think she's on Substack too. Now that I think about it, who writes about the literature industry, the publishing industry,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard her talk about the whole book talk thing. And to me, at least from the outside, that seems like it's just horrible for literature as an art form or a business, just the way that it will just work for like, tags or tropes, like, I like this trope, I don't like this one. And like at a certain point, like you might as well just have ChatGPT do it. Like, these are the types of characters I like, here's what I like, here's what I don't like, put it into the prompt and have it, spit out a book for you, right? Because at least that's my impression. What are your thoughts? Am I being unnuanced here because I'm, a boomer millennial who doesn't use TikTok?
I'm not super clued in, but I am like semi, like I pay attention to sort of what things that pop, and like Tumblr will talk about what's going on Twitter, on TikTok, and like important things. So I do see things, and I think it is bad for literature as an art form or as a form. I think it's very good for business. Like for business, it's very good because
the industry is struggling otherwise. Maybe this is just them trying to grab onto something.
Yeah,
Traditional
I
publishing
mean,
is really struggling.
yeah, I feel like that's part of it. Like, they know that there's a market. Like, if a lot of it becomes like they need to target their book so that it blows up on Big Book Talk, and then it will get boosted. And I wonder if it's kind of like Oprah's book club back in the day, right? Like that was the key. You get Oprah's book club, and now you've got a bestseller. Everyone will read it. Maybe you're too young for Oprah, but Oprah's book club was like a big like a big deal. And now it's book talk. And one might ask, like, well, were the books that, I'm not even saying Oprah picked them, but like that made their way to that that chance, like, are they better than the ones that are book talk? Like, instinctively I want to say yes, but I haven't read all of the Oprah picks, so maybe they're also like, nah, in my opinion.
That's the question, right? Because at the very least, like, you have probably maybe initially, but Oprah personally, but I assume it was like a team at a certain point. But you have a single gatekeeper, a group of gatekeepers who are tastemakers versus a decentralized fan community, or even at this point, like an algorithm. And like, is one better or worse than the other? I don't know. I guess it depends on who you ask. And I'm asking you, I suppose, because I could see good sides to both, right? Because on one level, I think it's cool that because you mentioned the 100 or 1,000 true fans, right? Because there's a YouTuber I follow, and like the musician world, his name's Samurai Guitarist, and he kind of made a similar video where, like, you don't need to be the Rolling Stones or the Beatles anymore. If you have that small dedicated fandom, you won't be huge, but you can have a living. Versus back in the day where you had you had
I think
to
that's true.
have a mass appeal.
I think that's true. I think that is one of the pluses of, like, there's a very big like winner take all approach in quote unquote mainstream music, if we're just going to look at music or film, where a select few get chosen and blasted everywhere, and you get so tired because that's all you're seeing all the time. But if you care enough to go below that, you can find like so many thriving bands that you can go see. And like, there's the question is if the touring infrastructure will, hold up long enough for them to like really make, like, I think COVID definitely really, messed with those people. But you can definitely make a living now as like a musician. I think the only problem then becomes, will these people follow you? Like, do you have access to them? Because you could have 20 million followers on Instagram, but if they got tired of the Instagram algorithm and they're not really checking in anymore or whatever, like, and they don't know that you're touring. I mean, they need to bring back the newsletters. And I don't say this as a Substack person being like, newsletters are the key, but bands had newsletters, since the creation of newsletters. Like, that was typically how they would reach fans. Like, you would go to a show and the opener would be waiting at the merch table and they'd be like, sign up for our newsletter, and then you'll find out when we're back in town or our next release or whatever. And you would start getting news. And I still get newsletters from some artists because I don't follow them on Twitter or on Instagram or whatever.
Maybe that's the future, because again, to use Substack as an example, right? Because I'm sure you see, because you have several orders of magnitude more subscribers than I do, but I'm sure you've seen something similar. Like, if you'd think, I have 700 subscribers, I should be getting 700 views, 700 likes. No, it's usually a good chunk smaller than that. But you will have like core people who you see up and show up to read what you write.
Yeah.
And I wonder, because I guess the other thing, I know we've talked on Substack just in text through about this, is I've noticed that, like, for example, when I was young, I guess I'm still young-ish in my 30s, but when I was in high school, right, it was, to be mainstream was very gauche. Like, oh, you listen to Beyonce and Coldplay. You want to, the more obscure things were, the better, because you felt like you had that more intimate relationship. But it seems like Gen Z and younger don't have that complex and hang up, for better or worse, and they can form that relationship just like little fandom tribes almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think both exist at the same time. Like, there is this appreciation for what's mainstream, and I wonder if this harkens back to the religious analogy, where it's like they like having something that's larger than life that they can share in appreciation with, masses of people. But they also have artists that they like, that they gatekeep. And they talk about how, like, we have to gatekeep this person. And it's like, or do you want them to make a living? Like, what are you talking about? Like, but they'll be like, no, we have to gatekeep. We have to gatekeep him. Like, we can't let him lose. He's too important for us. And then it's like, okay, but what happens when you lose interest and and you haven't helped them?
It seems like it can get away from you, because I feel like you can feel ownership of a artist's work or them as a person. It's like one of the last things I want to get to is, it kind of makes me think about how it feels like there's not really a mainstream anymore, but at the same time, because like the outsiders have become so much bigger. For like example, in this year for the U.S. presidential election, the Joe Rogan bump might have been the deciding factor in the U.S. election, which to me is so crazy, because like I don't listen to Joe Rogan very regularly at all, but I used to listen to him like 2012 to 2015, and I just kind of stopped keeping up with him unless it was, again, like an artist that I liked. I think the last episode I listened to had Rob Zombie on it, and that was several years back. But all that to say, it feels like there's not really a mainstream anymore, because the mainstream, the mainstream to exist is stuff that, like, say what you will about Joe Rogan, but he's become organically very popular, as opposed to either some of the mainstream news outlets, or, to loop back to some of our other discussion, some of these huge artists who have kind of maybe stayed a little bit too long past their prime, to the point where like these institutions have lost legitimacy. Same thing with the publishing industry. It's been so gatekeepy and maybe a little bit too concerned with profit, or trying to push forth like a certain social or political vision. Like you've kind of lost validity. Like on one level you see like Joe Rogan gets more views than the New York Times gets hits. So I guess that maybe that's more of an observation than even a question, that it seems like this bifurcation between what used to be considered the mainstream, this legacy media, these publishers, they've kind of lost their credibility just because they don't have the cultural reach and viewership they used to, whereas the
Yeah.
things that are huge and legitimately organically popular are, quote unquote on the outside. And I wonder if we'll continue to see like, the Joe Rogan of music, or like there will be an indie film that gets legitimately huge, because Star Wars was originally an indie film technically. I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
see that bifurcation continue to happen, where there's things that are, you have legacy media, New York Times, Hollywood studios, what have you, and this stuff that has maybe that if there could be any organically popular monoculture, I feel like, Joe Rogan, for better or for worse, is an example of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible. Like I try not to be too pessimistic because I'm like, well, you've only been alive so long. Like you can't pretend like everything, every possible combination of what's going to happen. I think a big problem as well with like the publishers, and if we look at like the labels and the film studios, is that they've gotten so consolidated. I think that's the right word, where there's like three big ones, and every studio, like the studios that you think are actually independent studios, are actually under that one. And that publisher, oh, you thought that was like an independent publisher? No, it's part of Random House. And there's only three big labels now. Like that's it, despite, you see Island, you see Republic, you're like, well, these are all labels. It's like, yeah, they're all under the big three labels. So they've kind of shot themselves in the foot in that way. So competition is not, I think like what's happening, like what happened with Joe Rogan, is like the alternative, because they tried to quash the competition so much that now this alternate thing popped up. But it is so interesting. I was thinking about this earlier, that, well, I've been thinking about this since the election, but it's interesting how Trump was the one who did the media circuit for his first win. Like he's the one who did SNL. He's the one who did all of the talk shows, and that worked then. And now, did he do any talk shows? Like, I feel like they've all decided that they would never have him on, right? Because like once he won, they were like, oh, how dare, like, I can't believe this. And it's like, well, you had him on. What are you talking about? Now you're upset.
I didn't follow it religiously, but I don't think so. But he sure as hell did the podcast rounds.
Yeah, and now he did the podcast circuit. So I wonder,
Kamala Harris because of it, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if his advisors are just like super on top of things. I don't know, but I thought that was really interesting.
Just has like a, I don't want to veer too much into politics for this interview probably, but I think Donald Trump is a person, because I've known him since I was a kid, right? I think he has almost like a supernatural ability. Like that's definitely his legit talent, that he's good at media manipulation, and he's good at like determining these trends. Because I guess like it kind of almost makes me think like, as I know you're in Canada, I grew up in Canada but moved to the US when I was like 10 or 11. But as far as like US history goes, people say that like what was his face? FDR was like the first president who was able to take advantage of radio as a medium. And JFK was the first, and then he was subsequently elected. JFK was the first one who was able to take advantage of TV as a medium. And Obama did a little bit at the end of his presidency. But for the most part, like Trump was the first president that was really able to take advantage of the internet and like podcasting and memes as a medium. So
yeah, absolutely. Because Obama, the White House joined Tumblr in 2013. So that was he was already in his second term, right? I think.
Yeah, and he did like Mark Maron around that time.
Between Two Ferns. I had remembered that he did that, and I was like, what was that? That felt very much like, I don't know. Do presidents ever have political careers after they're presidents, or is it just kind of like speeches and books and stuff? Like it kind of felt like angling, like I'm getting prepared for the future,
yeah.
Kind of.
Well, I think for sure it's less common, but for the most part they'll do like think tanks, speeches, advisory stuff. But yeah, Obama, it feels like he definitely was, like you said, angling for a media career. He had like a Netflix show. He tried to do like some movie production that didn't really go anywhere. which is kind of funny that like, it feels like maybe they like Obama and Trump were like subconsciously very jealous of each other. Like,
Mm.
Trump wanted to be the president, Obama maybe wanted to be a media guy, but I don't know. That's just a little pop psychology on my part.
That's it. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I was actually just thinking, like, one of the ways that I don't know that we would get a new mainstream, but one of the ways that we could get a new crop of talent, I think we need the benefactors to start stepping in. Like, just when you mentioned that Obama was trying to make movies and stuff like that, I'm like, yes, that is what we need. We actually do need the millionaires to start. Yeah, like there's quite a few artists now that have, because I almost said film festivals, music festivals have been struggling a lot in the UK. Like, a lot of them have had to shut down. And festivals are such an important part for bands to sort of, get greased their wheels. Is that the correct term in this?
I see what you're saying.
Get their feet wet. Like,
cut their teeth, yeah.
Get practice and sort of get out there. And there have been a few artists now that have started to create their own festivals, and I'm like, I don't think they're making, if they're making profit, it's not a lot, because they must be dealing with the same economic problems as the festivals that had to shut down.
Yeah.
But they're still like,
has Ozfest, but I'm trying to think of anybody who's done something similar.
Yeah, there's plenty.
Ozfest is huge.
Yeah, Tori Amos did it with what was it called? Like, there were a few in the 90s that were quite big.
Lilith Fair, was that her?
That's it. Lilith Fair was one.
I don't know that's right. So.
There was a Linkin Park one that MCR played on, and that's the only reason. Project Revolution. That's it. Project Revolution.
Technically, Motley Crue did Crue Fest. I think technically Lollapalooza was a Trent Reznor thing, or he was involved in some capacity. But those are like artists that were already huge. Like Ozzy Osbourne, basically, his band more or less invented metal, or at least synthesized what became metal. So it makes sense that like his name is synonymous with heavy metal enough that he could start a heavy metal festival that's named after himself. I don't know, like maybe Metallica is big enough. I don't know who else could do something like, and again, but that's, all I'm seeing, like Metallica's from like 1980 they formed. Beyonce's huge, but she started in like the late 90s. Like, there's not a lot of new blood. Maybe Taylor Swift could start her own festival and try to like, all right, let me try to bring up other artists that are similar to me or in my vein or something like that. But yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe like patrons in like the traditional sense of the word is. Yeah,
I just remembered Drake has his has his big thing too. Drake has his OVO Fest. I know Jamie Jasta bought Milwaukee Metal Festival. Is that what it is? Yeah, I think it's Milwaukee Metal Festival. He bought that, and like, he's not someone that I would think, is, super loaded,
it's not
but still
huge band either. So yeah.
There's, so I kind of feel like that's helpful, but we just need, these rich people to feel like they should help out.
Well, at a certain point, kind of like you said, I feel like max, there's 20 years of gas left in this tank. And that's me being very, very generous. Like the Rolling Stones, like you said, they've been touring constantly since like 1965. I think probably within the next 2 or 3 years, I would imagine Keith Richards and or Mick Jagger will die at that point. Like, one of them goes, you're out. Like, any of these big bands, like even like the 80s bands are getting a little bit long on the tooth, and the 90s grunge bands, or some of these 90s rappers, they are not the household names that some of these older musicians were. So you need to have something to prime the pump, so to speak. So maybe that will be what we see that'll get things going again. I don't know.
It is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of, so I semi-follow MCR kind of, as a relic, as a remnant of my fandom. And I saw that they were doing a Black Parade tour, and I was like, well, I'll look at it. Like, I'm not like, oh my God, I need to get tickets. I was like, I'll look at it. And then I saw that they're playing the stadium, like they're doing a stadium tour. And I'm like, what are you doing? First of all, what are you doing? Second of all, the prices were insane. Like the cheapest were like over 300 essentially. Like it was bananas. And I'm like, do you even have enough people to fill a stadium? Because I saw them on the reunion tour. And that was an arena. I don't think it was full, but it's also like you've already blown your reunion load. Like now.
Well, maybe that's why they did the Black Parade specifically, because I feel like that was one of the last big rock albums. One of the last few moments where rock music was a part of pop culture. Because remember, like that was probably like my freshman year of high school. There was like they did like a Black Parade parody, and now like what's the last? That might have been one of the last rock bands that had a cultural imprint. So maybe that's what they're banking on as all us millennials get older and start feeling nostalgic, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I'm all over the millennial nostalgia tours. Like I went to Death Cab for Cutie. I was like, fuck yes. Play Transatlanticism.
Yeah, I was a big MCR guy back in the day. That was my I had a couple dalliances from my my metal days, and MCR was definitely one of them.
Yeah, I guess Linkin Park could, like, now that they have a new singer, they could probably keep growing.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how that goes, just because I was never a huge Linkin Park guy, but Chester Bennington had such a like unique voice. There's been a handful of bands who's been able to like do a complete change like that, and I guess we'll see. But
yeah.
So I guess I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I guess I usually have one last question that I end with. But before that, do you have anything coming up that you want to promote? Any podcast appearances? Any articles that you're really pumped on that you're doing that are coming out with?
I'm such a slow writer that whatever I have in my drafts right now that I'm like, oh, I'm almost done, like might take months to finish. So I don't want to, falsely entice anyone. But yeah, I'm writing on Fandom, and my Substack is entirely free. There's no subscription fees for that because that's just, I don't really care. I guess it's the Fandom philosophy of like, whatever. I just want people to know a lot of the stuff that I found. So yeah, Fandom Exile. Yeah, that's basically it. Cool.
So I guess my final question I always kind of like to end with, and I think we might have touched on it a little bit, but since the world is kind of crazy right now, and it sounds like there's politics, the world, even in fandom, kind of like we talked about. But what, if anything, is making you feel hopeful for the future? And if you don't have anything, what would you like to see that would make you feel hopeful?
Yeah, so I thought about this because I know you asked this question, and I was like, oh my God, I am such a chronically depressed person. What am I going to come up with? But I think, like, I really do believe there is a lot of amazing music out there. You just have to go looking for it. I went to a show this weekend, and I was like, I'm so cranky. But I was like, I'll go anyway. And it was so, like, not to sound like a hippie, but I was like, it was so life affirming. Like, he was just so positive and like got the crowd going so well. And this is like a tiny show with like a 400 people venue. And he has this whole thing with like a parachute that you all go under the parachute and you're all participating. And I was like, this is so magical that we can still do this. And I always recommend people to look at their local concert listings, like maybe for smaller venues. And then if you don't recognize the names, just look them up, right? And you'll probably find something you like that you can go see soon. I found so many bands that way. And then you're supporting them by listening to their music and then just going to the show. And yeah, there's some really good stuff out there. I hope that they can, make a living, not necessarily, I don't even know what the goal is anymore for musicians. Grammys, like, does that help?
I don't think anybody cares. Making a living sounds like a good goal.
Like, they have to get on today's top hits. Yeah, that's right. Today's top hits. That helps you. That's like a guaranteed to make it a hit, essentially. But yeah, I hope that they can keep chugging along, and be creative.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, Monia, I appreciate you coming on so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.